Hey guys, today we're talking about inverses. And this is the first time it talks about inverses. We're going to do it a few more times as the year goes on. But today we're talking about inverses specifically with quadratic and square root equations, but also just with any type of equation. So what is an inverse? Well, essentially an inverse is whenever you switch your x and y values. So the inverse of a function is the relation, write that in here, relation, which is similar to a function, but it is the relation formed when the independent variable, which is your x value, your independent variable is exchanged or switched with the dependent variable. Okay, so what does that mean? All we're doing really is switching x and y. That's how you find an inverse, is you just switch your x and y. So, for instance, if we take a look here at number 1, if I were to find the inverses of this, literally all we're doing is switching my x and y. So what's the inverse of negative 3 and 4? Well, if we switch my x and y, we're going to have 4, negative 3. So notice your negative still stays there. You're just switching those two numbers. Okay? And then my next point is going to be at negative 1, 2. My next point is going to be at 0, 7. My next point is going to be at 4, negative 1. I might run out of room here if I'm not careful. Let's see. And then my last point is going to be at 10, 2. And then we put these squiggle brackets back on to show that it is a new relation. So you can see that difference there. So what do we do to find the inverse? All we have to do is switch x and y. Okay? Let's take a look at letter B, and you can see this again here. So here's my table, here's my x and y. Literally all we're going to do is switch those. So how do we find the inverse? We just switch x and y. Okay? So that's how we find an inverse. So let's see here. So if we have 1 and 5 for this one, we're going to have 5 and 1 for this one. If we have 2 and 6, we're going to have 6 and 2. 3 and 7, we're going to have 7 and 3. 4 and 8, we're going to have 8 and 4. 5 and 9, we're going to have 9 and 5. So everything's just kind of switching around. Okay? It is what it is. I mean, that's just how we're doing it. That's what an inverse is. So how does that look on a graph? Well, let's take a look at some graphs and see what that kind of looks like. So look at this first one. If we have f of x equals 4, that just means that we have y equals 4. And what kind of graph is y equals 4? So if we have our normal graph here, y equals 4 is just going to be a flat line at 4, right? See what I'm saying? That's y equals 4. But so what is the inverse of y equals 4 going to be? Well, the inverse of y equals 4 is going to be x equals 4. So this one has a 0 slope, but x equals 4, let's see what that looks like. Okay, x equals 4 is going to have a undefined slope. It's going to be straight up and down. So you see how we switch those around, so they're kind of perpendicular of each other in a way. They're really just switching across the inverses. Whenever you graph them, they reflect over y equals x. So y equals x is a diagonal line, like this. Okay? So if we just flip it over that line, it creates that inverse. Okay, so let's take a look here. If we have x equals negative 2, well, x equals negative 2 is going to look like this. It's going to be straight up and down at negative 2, and the inverse of that's going to be y equals negative 2, or f of x equals negative 2. And so that would be instead like this. And so that's kind of how inverses look. They're just like, well, they're the inverse of each other. They just flip over that y equals x. So just switch your x and y, you get your new inverse. So what about with equations? So how do we find the inverse of an equation or a function? Well, our first step to find the inverse is the same that it was on the first page. All we have to do is switch x and y. That's it. So we switch x and y, and then we're going to have to solve for our quote-unquote new y. All right, so we have to solve for our new y, and then we can rewrite it. And we rewrite it using two of these forms. We're going to rewrite it to show that it's the inverse. Okay, so you either use f to the negative 1 of x or y to the negative 1. Okay, so anytime you see a little negative 1 up here in the corner, that means that it's an inverse. So let's take a look at number 4. So how do we find the inverse of this? Well, we first have to remember that g of x, that's the same thing as y. Okay, and then second, we just switch my y and my x. Okay, so if I switch my y and my x, we're going to have an x here on the outside. We're going to go x equals the square root of 3y. And then I'm going to solve for my new x. Okay, all right, so my new y. So to solve for that new y, I'm going to have to get rid of everything that's being affected that y. So I'm going to have to get rid of that square root, and I'm going to have to get rid of that 3. And then I want you to see this. Oh, it's so cool. Your inverse function, everything is going to be backwards. You're going to have inverse operations for everything. So since I'm square rooting here, my inverse is going to be squared. Since I'm multiplying by 3, my inverse is going to be dividing by 3. So it's going to work out like this. So first, I got to get rid of that square root. To do that, I'm going to square both sides. All right? And we're going to end up with 3y equals x squared. And then all I need to do is divide both sides by 3. We end up with y equals x squared over 3. And all I need to do here is just rewrite it. And you can use f to the negative 1 of x, or you can use y to the negative 1. That's it. That's all you have to do. So I'm going to use f to the negative 1 of x equals x squared over 3. And then that is our inverse. How cool is that? Now, just notice how everything is a little bit backwards. So since I was square rooting, now I'm squaring. Since I was multiplying by 3 on the inside, now I'm dividing by 3 on the outside. So that difference is going to happen over here on this one. So let's take a look at number 5. So number 5, replace that with y, and then we're going to switch my y and my x. Okay? And so I'm going to end up with x equals 4 times y plus 3 squared. And then whenever we go to solve for this new y, just notice everything is backwards. Since I am multiplying by 4 here, I'm going to be dividing by 4. Since I'm adding by 3, I'm going to minus 3. And since I'm squaring, I'm going to square root. Everything is going to be backwards. So let's start off with this dividing by 4. Okay? So if I divide by 4, we're going to get x divided by 4. I'm just going to rewrite this as 1/4 x. Okay? So we got 1/4 x equals y plus 3 squared. Then to get rid of that squared, I'm going to square root it. Look at that. I'm going to square root it. And if I square root it, we're just going to end up with y plus 3 equals the square root of 1/4 x. So just notice, everything is already starting to be backwards. I was multiplying by 4, now I'm dividing by 4. I was squaring, now I'm square rooting. And I was adding 3, now I'm minusing 3. Check that out. So I end up with y equals the square root of 1/4 x minus 3. And look at this. I was multiplying by 4 on the outside. Now I'm dividing by 4 on the inside. I was squaring, now I'm square rooting. I was adding 3 on the inside. Now I'm minusing 3 on the outside. So everything is just a little bit backwards. And now all I have to do is rewrite it. This time I'm going to use y to the negative 1. You can just pick your favorite. It doesn't matter which one you use. They mean the same thing. But I'm just going to rewrite this as y to the negative 1 equals the square root of 1/4 x minus 3. Bam. There we have it. That is our inverse. Okay. Let's take a look at number 6 and number 7 now. So, number 6, find the inverse of f of x equals x squared plus 3. Easy. Remember, that's my y, and then all I have to do is switch my x and y. So we're going to get x equals y squared plus 3. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to minus 3 And then we're going to have to take the square root to get rid of that squared. So I'm going to minus 3 minus 3. We're going to get y squared equals x minus 3. Then I'm going to take the square root of this side, take the square root of this side, and we're going to end up with y equals the square root of x minus 3. Then we can rewrite it with our f to the negative 1 of x equals the square root of x minus 3, and then bam, there you have it. And once again, notice how everything is backwards. I was adding 3 on the outside, now I'm minusing 3 on the inside. I was squaring, now I'm square rooting. So that's how you find an inverse starting with an equation. All right, our last one here. We got a lot going on. We got a 4, we got a 2, we got a negative 8. So we're going to have to figure this out. But first, let's switch my x and y. Okay? So we're going to have my x over here. We're going to go x equals 4 times the square root of y plus 2. I made that a little too big. Let's fix that real quick. And we're going to have a minus 8 on the end. Okay, so make sure you go in the right order. You can't divide by 4 first. You can't minus 2 first. The first thing you got to do is add my 8. So I'm going to add 8 to both sides. And we're going to have x plus 8 equals 4 times the square root of y plus 2. Then I can divide by 4. So we're going to have x plus 8 over 4 equals the square root of y plus 2. Then I'm going to square both sides to get rid of that square root. And we're going to end up with y plus 2 equals x plus 8 over 4 squared. And then, last but not least, I'm going to need to minus this 2 over. Okay, so we're going to end up with y equals x plus 8 over 4 squared minus 2. All right, and the last thing I want to do, rewrite it, okay? Rewrite it because you have to show it's an inverse, so you have to use a negative there, a negative 1. So I'm going to go y to the negative 1 equals, parentheses, x plus 8 over 4 squared minus 2. And just notice how everything is backwards, right? Everything is backwards. We were minusing 8, now I'm adding 8. We were multiplying by 4, now I'm dividing by 4. I was adding 2, now I'm minusing 2. So that's where the phrase that inverse operations, that's what it means, inverse operations, and then we can create these inverses. So in your own words, what are inverses? So think about that. For me, it's just switch x and y. Okay? All right, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for sticking around with me.